I have so much in this room right now.
We couldn't shoot any more differently.
Does that make you feel old? I've got to now lift this up. What should we call you, a brand whore?
Oh crap!
It's a bit smushy.
That's the wrong side of it.
Nikon, Nikan, whatever you want to call it.
When you were still in diapers,
Because I want to be like the safari expert and make these amazing videos,
I'm gonna keep that bit in.
because now I have my own beanbag.
Many of you might wonder whether or not you've got the right photographic gear for safaris. So we thought what we'd do today is show you what we pack when we go on safari. And when I say we, I mean me and my co-host, Lance van der Vyver. Lance, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much.
Good to see you, man. Lance, I'm going to jump straight in. Am I right in saying you photograph with Canon gear? Tell us a little bit about why you photograph Canon gear and how long you've actually used it.
Yeah, so the guys who know my backstory know that I was born and raised in New Zealand. So my first camera I bought in New Zealand was a Canon. And no specific reason other than Canon at the time in New Zealand was one of the bigger brands where you could get a lot of stuff. So they had most of the range. Nikon, Nikan, whatever you want to call it, they didn't have much in my town, especially when we were there. And the Sony wasn't a thing then. You could get the little square, little tiny cameras, and Olympus and that were a thing. So we're talking back in the DSLR, just out of film, but in the DSLR, beginning of DSLR's era. Man, does that make you feel old?
I know, right?
Yeah. So I first camera was Canon. And then because I started on Canon and I had the Canon ecosystem, I never had a reason to change. I almost jump ship to Sony once when Canon brought out its first mirrorless, which was trash. And luckily the Canon mirrorless have got very well or very good now. So I'm still Canon. But I believe you've been a bit of a what should we call you, a brand whore?
Well, you're right about the brand bit. So, yes, when you were still in diapers, I was still photographing in film. And back in those days, I actually used a Pentax camera. And the reason for that is because in those days, and I was still in school when this happened, I was our high school photographer. My mom had a Pentax camera. So I inherited her film camera, photograph, film, and slide. But I also, when I bought my first digital camera, I bought a Canon 20D. And that's when I started photographing wildlife. And I stuck with Canon for a very long time and really enjoyed the Canon brand up to the point where, while I was already a photographic safari guide, Nikon actually approached me and said, would you like to switch over? And they really made it worth my while. So I got a good trade in. And the reason that I did it was actually to be able to master the Nikon gear as well. Because as you'll know, as a photographic safari guide, you know, a third of your clients are on Canon, a third are on Nikon, and a third are on Sony. You know, the operating systems are slightly different. So you want to make sure that you master them all. So for a few years, I photographed with Nikon. And then later, I moved back to Canon. But I'll talk to you a little bit later about exactly why I did that. But before we actually jump into what Canon gear we use specifically, I want to ask you this. I think we can all agree that the three big brands at the moment when it comes to wildlife photography and mirrorless cameras is Canon, Nikon, and Sony. And I suppose you can add Olympus there on the side as well. But
Olympus
I think in terms of having a big range. So let's add Olympus.
Olympus is definitely up there, especially for birders. Yeah.
Do you agree with me that it's less important, or you should worry less about what brand you use and think more about what camera model you buy and which lenses you buy, depending on what kind of wildlife you like to photograph?
Absolutely. So I believe me and you had the discussion a lot when we were working together in the sands a long time ago. I almost bought a D850 with the Nikon 70 to 200 because I didn't have a 70 to 200 at the time. I only had a 200mm prime. That one. And at the time, Canon's 70 to 200 was old and clunky and kind of heavy, and the cameras were so-so, but the D850 had just come out, which is arguably one of the best wildlife cameras that has ever been. So And I almost bought it, but the only problem was that I then had to buy another camera so I could buy a lens. So I ended up not doing that. But yeah, I I don't care what the brand is. I've only stayed with the one brand because I've always had it, and I would need to literally buy a camera to buy a lens, which doesn't really make sense for me. And if people are getting into photography, I would recommend pick a brand that has the best gear that you can afford and that you need now, and then just stay with that brand. Essentially, they all do the same thing, right? There's lots of marketing gimmicks around which one's best, and one year will be better, and then the next year it won't be, and so on and so on and so on. But for 100%, if you and a lot of young photographers, we actually say this. We say this a lot to young photographers. If you can buy a second-hand lens in particular, because the lenses are what kill you in wildlife photography price-wise. If you can buy a second-hand lens, even if it's a DSLR now in this world of mirrorless, and you can get a good price, absolutely go for it. And then that's the brand that you're going to use, right? So there's a lot of good deals going now for lenses and for used equipment because people are going mirrorless. And if you're just getting into photography, now's the time to buy. And don't buy new, especially if you haven't used it before. You don't know what necessarily you're doing.
So basically what Lance means there, for those of you that don't know, with the big switch from DSLR to mirrorless, there was a big switch in the lenses as well. So in other words, some lenses will only fit on DSLRs and others will fit on mirrorless cameras, but you can use the old DSLR lenses on the mirrorless cameras if you use a little adapter. And because a lot of people have switched over to mirrorless completely, buying both the camera and the new expensive mirrorless lenses, they're getting rid of their old DSLR lenses, or at least the lenses that fit on DSLR cameras. So if you can pick up a second-hand 500 f4 or 600 f4, or maybe even a 400 f2.8 or a 70-200 f2.8, which is a very popular wildlife lens, you can use those lenses with adapters on your mirrorless cameras. So I agree with you. That's a good way of maybe starting to decide on what brand you're going to use. But I think it was important for me just right from the start to let the viewers know that you don't have to worry too much about which brand you choose as long as you choose Canon, Nikon, Sony, or Olympus. They are luckily competing so much in this space that they're pushing each other and pushing the boundaries so much that all those cameras and all those lenses are excellent. But you'll quickly see when you start Googling that there's massive price differences. So we're both shooting with Canon cameras, and we have completely different setups, and that's why I'm so excited about this podcast, Lance, is because you and I, who, a lot of people might think that we have exactly the same things in the bag because we're Canon shooters. We couldn't shoot any more differently. I have a small, light, compact setup. You have a much larger, heavier setup. So let's jump straight in there. Tell the viewers what Canon gear you use and why you've chosen those cameras and those lenses specifically.
So I'm shooting Canon mirrorless now. I made the switch probably 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer. So up until then, I was using DSLRs. I had a 500mm f4, which I still think is one of the best wildlife lenses you can get. And I would recommend to any young photographer, new hobbyist, someone who's serious getting into it, try and find a secondhand 500mm f4. Don't even worry about the camera. I wouldn't even necessarily say go mirrorless if you're getting into it. Just get a DSLR that goes nicely with that lens because it is beautiful. And other than that, so I'm shooting with an R5 with a battery grip. The battery grip just gives me so much more life. People think that you've got two batteries now, so it's two batteries like this. You're going to get double the battery life. You don't. You get so much more than double because one is typically running the camera and then one is dedicated to the lens. So it's powering the autofocus, the image stabilizer, and all that. So battery grip necessary for me. We spend a lot of time on safari. Sometimes you're shooting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and you don't want your batteries to die. Speaking of that, I also have a handful of spare batteries somewhere next to me at all times. This is my secondary lens. It's a 70-200. This is the F4 version. And the reason I got the F4 version, what's something good to my face? Look how small that is. So, and with the lens hood taken off, it's tiny. It's about a can of Coke size. So here's a Stanley water bottle versus that lens. It's tiny.
Amazing.
For being able to put it in your bag, throw it over your shoulder on a sling, whatever, and go to these amazing places without weighing your bag down too much. Awesome lens. I know people with the 2.8 version. I used to have the 2.8 version of the DSLR 70 to 200, which is beautiful. Obviously, I'm giving away a stop of light, but I don't miss it with mirrorless. The mirrorless cameras are so good with their high ISOs. I don't need a 2.8, which is that little bit bigger, especially when it's my secondary lens. If I was a wedding photographer, portrait photographer, and all that kind of stuff, I would probably want the 2.8. But for now, super happy with this little chuck it in any bag I've got. So that's my one. This is my secondary setup. We should probably talk about it. Memory cards. I've got the Pro grade. Pro grade, what is that? It's a big card. So 256 gigabytes. I shoot a lot of video as well as stills. So that's my main card in my camera. And then I've got a little Lexar 64 gig SD card to back up. So that is secondary camera. My main camera, which I might have to sit back for this, is the R3. So absolutely beautiful camera. And then that is glued to my 400mm 2.8. So the 400mm 2.8 is awesome. I also have the 2x teleconverter to go with that. I have always hated teleconverters my whole life. With these new lenses and these new teleconverters, they are so sharp, you don't know the difference. So with the 2x teleconverter on, it becomes an 800mm 5.6. 5.6, you are throwing away a lot of light, so in super low light conditions, it's not the best. Again, this camera's ISO is fantastic. I push it up to easily 12,800 ISO to shoot on this camera. So you can push your ISOs to use that light. And then down the bottom here, I use one of these pano plates, which is very nice. So if we are lucky enough to get out on the ground and put the camera on the ground, you'll see it'll sit on that pano plate, so getting nice and low. And then you can also swivel like this. So you can do that with a beanbag and stuff, but beanbags, when you move your camera, will move the focus ring for you, which really sucks. This thing takes your camera from out of the dust, and it means you can pan with animals on the floor, which is really nice. Also works awesome for the vehicles. So when I'm sitting in the front of a vehicle, I'll typically have a beanbag on the side of the car or in the front, and then I'll either put the pano plate on that, or I'll just put the pano plate straight on the door. And that is my main camera and lens system. So this is my primary go-to. First, pick it up and shoot the nicest images. And then you'll see there's some other equipment attached to that, which I will talk about in a little piece. My third camera is you. You are my third camera. So if I'm going to a place where I think 3 cameras would be a big advantage, sometimes you want 3 cameras like in a hide. You would want your 400mm or your 800mm. You would want your 70 to 200 ready, but you also might want a 35mm or a 12mm or whatever to shoot a wide scene. So then I would take my third camera, which is an R6, and then I've got a 35mm prime, the cheapie, which is probably over here somewhere. What have we got in this pouch? No, this is the 2x teleconverter. So 2x teleconverter, so that makes it 800mm. About the same size. I don't even know where it is. It's probably, I don't even know where it is at the moment. So 35mm prime for the wide angle, or I have an old 10 to 22, which is a DSLR lens, which I have an adapter for, which is what I'm filming this now. And that'll be my wide setup. So yeah, that's my 3 cameras. And then, as you can see, I'm already over my weight restriction on a small plane. And then, yeah, I believe your camera and lenses are quite a lot different.
Well, so that's really funny because you've basically just made my whole point about why I photograph so differently from you. So all that grunting of picking up the big heavy lenses and talking about weight restrictions, that's exactly the reason why I moved away from using those big primes to using your lighter long range zoom lenses. So I used to photograph with a Nikon D850, as Lon said, one of the best wildlife photography cameras ever made. And on that, I had a 500 f4. And then with that, I used I think it was a D500 with a 7200 f2.8. And that was sort of my main kit for many years as a wildlife photographer. And at that stage, we were leading some trips to India. And what had happened was the first pitfall was when I traveled through all the airports, I always had issues with my bag. The bag was overweight. It was extremely heavy. It got heavy, so I bought a wheelie bag. And the moment I bought a wheelie bag, they kept on checking the weight, and then I had to pay extra. It wouldn't fit in all the overhead lockers. And that already was a big frustration for me. And then when we were in Ranthambore itself, looking to photograph tigers, not only did I often feel too tight with the 500, but whenever we walked, say for instance up the fort to photograph birds, I found that my clients with their lighter lenses like the 150 to 600s or the 100 to 400s, they were just easily getting beautiful bird photographs, and I was lugging this big old 500 f4 with me, and it was just a real mission. And I got so frustrated on that trip that I actually decided I'm going to downscale. And what I mean by that is just get rid of all the big heavy gear, and I just wanted one camera and one lens with me to cover all bases. And at that stage, I didn't really like the Nikon shorter zoom lenses, like the 880 to 400 was a really notoriously bad lens. So what I did was I switched over to Canon, and at that stage, I bought a 100 to 400, which I used on a 5D Mark IV. But now I've also switched to mirrorless. At the moment, I use the Canon R6, which is a little bit smaller and lighter than the R5. And I use this 100 to 500. And look, that's also a super small lens. And I use the 100 to 500 millimeter RF lens on that R6. And everything about that combo is light and small. So I don't use a battery grip because I don't want that extra weight and bulk. I just change batteries as necessary. And I also actually don't use a secondary camera. And you might wonder, geez, but why wouldn't you just have another camera body with you? And you might be able to attest to this, Lance, but sometimes if you have too many options, you don't actually know which one to pick up. And I see that a lot with my clients. They'll have 2 or 3 camera bodies. They actually don't know in a sighting which one to pick up, and then they panic. And before you know it, they've missed the shot. So by having just the R6 and the 100 to 500, I can take an animal in the environment at 100 because it's a full frame camera body. And at 500, I'm at least getting, decent bird shots or portraits as well. And another thing that I actually like about the R6, the file sizes are half the size than the R5, and that means it's quick download speed. So we'll talk a little bit in a moment about the quality or the sacrifice in quality that I had to make getting this f7.1 lens as opposed to, an f2.8 prime like you have. But in my case, I'm using a completely different setup. It's small, it's light, it's compact, and it's all to avoid the weight, the space, and those, I've got to now lift this up to get this bird shot or whatever it might be. I can photograph out of hand all the time without getting tired.
So it's quite funny. So this 400 2.8 is not anywhere near as heavy as the 500. So that's one-handing it. And I handhold this. And it's ironic because I shed all that weight with this lens, and then I added all this feckin' weight by putting these tripod plates and pieces of metal on there. But, yeah. So, so shooting the 500, you'll know. So I played a lot of squash. I've always been injured because I've been lopsided my whole life. So I had a really bad wrist injury for, 2 years? Where I couldn't pick up my 500 f4. I tore the cartilage in my wrist, and so you basically can't put weight on your wrist this way because that puts pressure there, and everything hurts. So even lifting up my phone or a water bottle like this hurt for 2 years as a photographer. It's not great. I don't recommend running into walls. So then I started picking up my 500mm f4, which is like 3.5-4 kilos with the camera attached, like this. And anyone who's ever had tennis elbow knows the way you give yourself tennis elbows. You lift heavy weights with your fingers spread, and then your sort of your wrist up. So I had terrible issues because of the weight for a long time. Luckily now my system is lighter. The mirrorless are so much lighter than the DSLRs. But yeah, like you say, you're a tiny little backpack chucked in nice and easy, quick, and I grunt a lot.
I always laugh when I go and pick you up to take you to the airport, because you'll be packing your clothes bag, which is, the size of a bus, and then your camera bag, even though it's relatively small, when I pick it up, it's so heavy, so heavy with all that gear in there. And I suppose you're always overweight and just make it look light when you get to the airport. But I think the thing that's important to talk about when we look at the differences is that you love photographing with prime lenses. So you're always going to have that 400 f2.8 or a 500 f4 because of those crisp photographs with a beautiful bokeh and blurry backgrounds. Whereas for me, I'm not so worried about that. I'm willing to sacrifice that to give me the flexibility of zooming in and out. And the point is that it's not a right or a wrong. And I think a lot of people, when they listen to your first introduction about what you use, they were like, oh crap, I'm never going to be a good wildlife photographer because I'm never going to be able to afford all this gear. But the reality is, it's more about what you want to photograph and the kind of things that you like photographing and the way that you like your photos to look, versus whether it's right or wrong. I have one small camera with a relatively small zoom lens. You have 3 cameras with big prime lenses and a big variety. But we're both getting excellent shots when we're out there. But we win some and we lose some because of what we've decided to shoot with.
And if I had unlimited money, my system would be different. So it's also, my gear's not cheap. I've spent a lot of money on gear over the years, but I would actually have a different setup. So instead of the 70-200, in an ideal world, the new Canon 100-300 2.8 it's simply one of the best lenses ever made. It is beautiful, but at R250,000, it's for a secondary lens. It's just a no. The Canon 200-500 with the built-in teleconverter, which they were all talking about, which might have been smoke and mirrors, but it also might not be. That would be my dream lens as well. So I love the 500mm focal length more than the 400mm focal length, but it's like you say, it's a limiting focal length. If you are not at the perfect distance for a portrait or very far away for a nice wide scene with it, it's almost too long. So to have one lens where you can zoom right out is a lot handier. But in saying that, if I could only have one lens ever, it would probably be the 500mm f4, and I would work around everything else. Yeah.
Well, so it's because you are often lucky enough that you can actually move around. So you are in a private game reserve where you can off-road, and hence you can park in the right distance from the animal. Whereas a lot of people that might be watching this will be photographing in national parks where they can't necessarily control that. And in that case, I find that very often your zoom lens works better because you might not be able to get close enough, so you want to zoom in a little bit or what have you. I think for me, what's important to mention is that all of us, even us professionals, get caught up in that dangerous realm where we always think we don't have the right gear. So you say to yourself, well, in an ideal world, whereas in actual fact, I always say to people, once you've bought something, just master the technical side. So get to know your camera, understand your lens and when it works best for you and what, where you need to be to give you specific depths of field. So learn about depth of field and all those sort of things. And then just use what you have. You can upgrade at a later stage, but don't constantly think to yourself, oh, I should be on Sony because someone told me Sony's better than Canon, or I need a prime because it's better than a zoom lens or whatever. This podcast is not to make you change your gear. It's to make you feel more relaxed about what you've actually decided to use.
Yeah, but also, so another very good point is if you are a person who's coming on one safari once in your whole life, don't buy a camera or a lens. Maybe if you come every 2 or 3 years out on safari, don't buy a camera and a lens. You can rent all of this stuff for very reasonable prices these days. And then it's not yours to own. You don't have to worry about it for the rest of the year when you don't touch it. Yeah. Obviously, if you're a photographer and you do photography every week, every month, then it's better to have your own. But if you're coming on like a once-in-a-lifetime safari type trip and you want this bigger, massive gear and you're only ever going to use it for that, don't buy it. Rent it. Yeah. We've got some amazing companies here where you can rent it.
I don't know about you, but I typically use Outdoor Photo in Pretoria East. They've got an incredible rental department with a very big variety of camera models and lenses. So we'll pop some links there in the video description for you guys to go and check that out. So I totally agree with that. In terms of camera support, I know you said that you've got your little plate at the bottom, but what else do you use when you're out there? Do you actually take a beanbag with you? Or do you ever use a monopod or a tripod when you take wildlife photographs? Or do you typically just use that little plate at the bottom and use whatever support they've got at the destination?
So that's a very good question. So it's not a very good answer. It depends. If I'm traveling in South Africa and I am driving to the lodge, most likely I will take a beanbag. So I've always used Badger beanbags. Now I have my own beanbag. We've got a very cool lady up by us. Yeah, so she's makes them. That we've done the smaller ones, but she can make big ones. So I take my own little beanbag. I've got a couple of these. So this sits over the door, but actually more often it sits because I normally sit in the front, smushed in next to the driver, so the guests have all the space. More often it actually sits next to the gear stick down here, and then my 7200 sits on it. And my 400mm sits between my legs or on the dashboard, depending on the vehicle setup. So I've normally always got a beanbag in South Africa. For me to travel with a full beanbag anywhere else in the world, it's just weight. You can fold these ones up really nicely when they're empty. The problem is I don't want to fill this with sand. The lodge doesn't want to give me rice. The lodge doesn't want to give me beans. I also don't want to fill it with rice and beans because then the mice eat them. And then the problem is, as soon as you put sand in this, every time you put your lens on it, sand comes out, dust comes out.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a camera full of dust, and that's a nightmare. So we use plastic pellets. It's offcuts from a factory that makes plastic products, so it's actually doing some good. We don't make the pellets just for this. We're actually recycling waste, essentially, for these. So that's really cool. And these might actually be for sale at some point. We need to figure that out. But so, in South Africa, always this. In places like the Pantanal, East Africa, I will sometimes take a tripod. So I've got a lightweight carbon fiber tripod. And then I've just purchased myself a new monopod, because I've got a monopod, but it's a broken one. It was someone's throwaway. And then, so for on a boat, you want a little bit of support. Tripod's cool, but if you don't have a gimbal head, a tripod is useless on a boat, because as soon as the boat does this, you can't keep up. So if you've got a gimbal head, you can keep it nicely. But what I found's more handy is a tripod with a monopod with feet at the bottom. So you've got a little bit of stability at the bottom. And then where you move, the monopod comes with you. So Pantanal, I'll take a monopod. I might take a tripod. I'm still deciding at this point. East Africa this year, I'm going to take a monopod. And that's normally, so I normally do two things with the monopod. One's a boat where everything's moving, sometimes on a vehicle, but not very often. But sometimes I will use the monopod to lower my camera down and close to the ground. You have to be in a reserve where you're allowed to do that. We don't do it in places where it's frowned upon. We normally don't do it around other vehicles. But if you attach your monopod with a head to the bottom of your camera, or you can get cages and clamps and things. And then with these little nice flippy screens that the mirrorlesses have, you can lower this to the ground and use either a remote or just lean out and push the trigger. But you can get close to the ground without actually having to get out and on the ground, which is really nice. So that is another thing that I use the monopod for. Tripod's useless for that. And then the big Buffer 400, I normally just actually hold the lens foot and I lean out, and then you really hear me make noises. So I'm leaning out typically with my camera 6 inches or whatever from the ground. I'm holding it. Normally, I hold it sometimes both hands. So normally left-handed, so my right hand is on the controls. But sometimes the position of where I am parked or have to be parked so the guests have the best view, sometimes I have to hold it right-handed and then use my left hand to push the the focus buttons and the shutter. And then all sorts of weird noises come out of my face because then it gets very heavy.
Well, I think all these extra supports like your tripod and your monopod and all those sort of things, you have to have it. For instance, we're on a boat in the Pontinol because of the size of your camera. And again, that's very much the reason why I've gone for the much lighter setup. So when I've got my R6 with 100 to 500, I can pretty much shoot out of hand in any situation. And the only reason why I still take a molar bag with a small bean bag like this is actually for video. So in other words, if I'm in self-driving in the Kruger National Park or somewhere and I just want to keep the camera dead still, I can pop it on the bean bag and carry the full weight of the camera and I can take some video footage. But if I'm pretty much walking anywhere, doing birds or sitting on a boat or in a vehicle, I can essentially just put the camera on my lap, pick it up, and take photographs wherever I go. So I only really ever take a tripod with if I'm expecting to do some astrophotography or some kind of landscape photography in the national park or reserve where I go to. But to be completely honest with you, I actually despise a big camera bag when I travel, and now you've already got the big heavy bag. Where do you fit the tripod? That's an extra piece of hand luggage. So there's a lot of, yeah, I know, right? So there's all these, where do you put all these things? And I think those of us that have done that a lot, you're always prioritizing your camera gear. But if you put your tripod in your suitcase, you might be taking only 2 pairs of underwear with because you're going to run out of space eventually.
That's actually one of the reasons why I say it depends as well. So if we're going somewhere where you're on a small little plane and your total luggage allowance is 15 kilos, I'm not taking a tripod. I'm not even taking a monopod. I'm not even taking half the stuff we're going to show you today. And then I'll take 1 pair of underwear and half a sock.
So tell me, what camera bag do you use, Lance, to fit all, your 2 or 3 camera bodies, the big 400 f2.8, you've got the 70-200 f4. What bag did you decide to use, and why that one specifically?
I have had one of the best backpacks I think that has ever been made. Unfortunately, the brand I don't even think exists anymore. They don't make this particular bag anymore. And it's Click Elite Pro. So it's this backpack. It is a large backpack, but I can get my 400 millimeter 2.8 on the camera in this bag, plus all of this other junk. It's customizable. It's very handy. So it has all the compartments. It's nice and soft, so it's a bit smushy. You can smush it in. It does fit in all the overhead lockers, which is very cool as well. And the inside is customizable, so you basically do the inside for your setup. It's got a space for your laptop and your tablet if you want. This is actually where I put a whole bunch of other things. And then on the sides, it has all these other cool little compartments for bits and bobs. So often I would travel overseas with chargers and sunscreen and blah, 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 all in the sides. And then on the vehicle, I would then take it out and just leave it in my room. So
you're essentially driving with all those big cameras on your lap.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it depends. If if I've got one client, I'm not going to sit in the front most likely. If then I'll more likely be in the back. Then the other cool thing about this bag is it has these attachment rings, and you can see mine are very well used. And that actually brings me to one of my random pieces of best things I've ever bought, and that is a bungee cord. So this bungee cord I would put around the seat and then hook it into the bag like this, so it's like a seat belt. It's going to save the bag flying off when the guy decides to brake after he's about to hit a tortoise or something. So, and then I would have it in the back. If I'm front seat guiding, I have all of this junk in and around me. Yeah, so that's one of my bags. I also made this one. So this one's a lot smaller. It's just a square. And this is made... It opens from the top, and it's literally just a one-piece bag. So the nice thing is the 400 2.8 fits in there with the hood on, with the camera attached, sitting on its footplate. So I can then carry this to and from my room just like this. And what's also quite nice is I normally stuff a towel in there and things as well, but the 70 to 200 on the R5 and my flash also fits in there. It's not super protected for being bumped around, but at that stage, things aren't going to get bumped around because I'm going from my room to the vehicle. And the other nice thing is because this is soft, it packs flat. So I can also use this as my clothes bag if I'm going away with somewhere small because it's quite a lot of room inside. And then when I get there, I then swap it over and I use this as a type of camera bag, or it depends again where I'm going. Otherwise, I don't use it. But the nice thing is, it's a nice option for instead of me carrying something under each arm and some stuff over my shoulder and other stuff between my legs to the car each day. If it's a far walk, I'll probably take that, which is cool. And then the last bag. I say it's the last bag. I actually have another bag. But so my main bag now, the problem with my backpack is, one, all this stuff is very heavy and I feel it. So going through an airport for 3 or 4 hours with that on my back, it kills me. So it's very heavy. So now I've actually done what you said you hated you did, and I bought myself a roller bag. This roller bag is not light. It's the think tank bag. It's the airport security. So the nice thing is it has the lockable sides and whatever just fell out of it because it's all open. So it has the lockable sides. You can zip it up. You can lock things in, and then fully customizable inside as well. So you've got all your compartments. It fits a lot of gear. It fits the 400mm in there on the body. It fits the 70 to 200 in there. It fits all of my other nonsense that I used to get in my backpack. And it also fits in the overhead compartments of every plane I've been on so far. So that's super nice. It is a roller bag, so people do look at it like, oh, there's something big, expensive, and heavy in there versus a backpack where they just look at me like that guy might have COVID because he's sweating and he's pink. So pros and cons. And then lastly... something that you will probably recognize is this awesome little low pro bag. Tiny little backpack, little compartment. So sometimes I travel with all my chargers thrown in here because then I can just put this in the corner of my room. This is normally a South Africa thing. I know where all my chargers are. They're all in one place instead of mixing it in with my luggage and my camera equipment. And then sometimes on the vehicle, I will use this little backpack to hold my flash setup. Yeah. So flash, I always have with me typically, but you don't very often use it. So it'll be sitting in here, charged, ready to go. And this can sit behind the seat or smushed in between me and the driver. It's really nice and small. And then if I do need the system, it's quickly there and accessible. So, yeah. How many bags do you have?
So you remind me of where I was about 4 years ago. Like I remember that I had that exact think tank bag, and it was exactly that bag that they pulled me over at the airport every single time because it looked so heavy, like you said. So what I have is a Gura Gear Kiboko 22-liter butterfly bag. That's the wrong side of it. That's the front side. So it's got the sort of 2 compartments on either side. It's substantially smaller than the bag that you have, the backpack bag. But what I like about it, it still has a laptop compartment, even though it's a little bit smaller. It's got the laptop compartment because I'm not going to be carrying a camera bag and a laptop bag. But it's got more than enough space for my R6 with 100 to 500 on it. And then for a few smaller lenses like this 24 to 105 and my 16 to 35, a flash, all the hard drives, laptop charger, and even, space for a few clothes if I'm traveling far and stuff like that. So I love the Gura Gear butterfly bags. They're just the most comfortable, really well-designed bags, nice and sturdy. And I especially like where they've put the laptop slot because it's between the camera and your back. So very well protected when you're wearing it and traveling as well. And then like Lance said, I've got that same low pro bag, the small blue one he just showed you. And the reason for that is when I'm out on drive, I don't typically want to have this big bag with me. Because remember, I just have the one camera and lens. So if I don't want to keep it on my lap, or if I carry my second lens, this one with me, I just pop it in that small little bag. So that can sit by my feet or in between me and the guide. And, that way, at least the camera gear is protected when it starts raining or if it's specifically, particularly dusty. So that way it works very easily. And at the moment, I must be honest with you, I can't see me changing this setup bag-wise, camera-wise anytime soon, just because it's so handy. For me, ease of use, lightness, flexibility, not having to make decisions far, far, far outweighs having all the options and the better quality. And it's just a different way of shooting. I know so many people have wondered about this 100 to 500 RF, which has a 7.1 minimum aperture when it's all the way zoomed in. And I already have one review on it. I'll link to it above. But I'll do a detailed review now that I've used it for almost 2 years. I'll make a video about that soon. And you guys must go and check that out because it's all about understanding how to use the lens. It's about where you park to allow yourself to zoom in maximum and making sure that the distance is far behind the animal to still get those lovely shallow depth of field shots, but also using the right camera model on it that can handle low light so that at 7.1 you can still get a fast enough shutter speed. But if I quickly look around me, a couple of other things that I have in my bag that I just felt like is worth mentioning. And Lance said earlier, it's good to have these little extra compartments where you can stuff things in. You need a few things to keep your camera gear clean. So what I often do when I travel, and if my camera is not in a bag on my lap or somewhere else in the vehicle, I'll put a buff or a head sock over it just to keep the dust from getting into it. But then, you take with these little blowers. I don't typically use it on drive, but it's always close by, and that just allows you to blow the dust off. And then once I've blown off the dust, I'll have one of these little brushes that I can just take a little bit of excess or sort of stubborn pieces of dust off. And especially if you're cleaning your lenses. So first a little dust, a little air blow, then a little brush, and lastly I use one of these little cloths just like you would use to clean your glasses, and then you can go and just clean your lens like that. So 3 pieces that I highly recommend you have with you: a dust blower, a little brush, and then a microfiber towel or cloth that you can clean it with. So beautifully branded with a Panthera Photo Safaris logo on there. So yes, definitely lots of little extras in my bag that I think every single person should have in there. And you mentioned it earlier as well: spare batteries, spare memory cards, all the little extras. And sometimes it's there we go. That's your flash batteries. You could have little Gorilla Pods, memory cards, Gorilla Pods if you want to put your cell phone on something as well. Before you know it, you've used up all those lovely little pockets in the camera bag.
I normally always have an Allen key. because there's always something on photography that needs to be tightened or whatever. This one's really cool. So my flash bracket, actually, this magnet sticks to that. So as long as I don't remember to take it off and go through the airport, they take my Allen key away from me every time. So I have a lot of Allen keys. I have less every trip, but I have a lot because they always take them away. And super important, a Leatherman. So I normally always have a Leatherman with me. Not if you're flying. If you're flying, it goes in your suitcase. But I take a Leatherman every trip. So mostly because of the big screwdrivers. Every now and then you need to cut something. And also because I typically have some form of tape. So old gaffer tape. It's great if a tripod or a monopod or something you're using to fix something kind of breaks and you can tape it together. So this is tape. It's like duct tape, but it's not as sticky, but you can remove it again. Or just the normal
insulation tape.
Insulation tape. Insulation tape's great for wrapping things up.
But wait. Can you actually take your Leatherman with? Can you put it in your bag?
Yeah. Not your carry-on.
No, but aren't you supposed to not have sharp objects in your suitcase?
Nah, it's not a weapon. I've been to all the countries you've been, and I've always got my...
You have been able to travel with that in your big bag. I'm really surprised. I suppose, it is safe down in the cargo hold, but I'm actually really surprised that they allow you to take that with.
Yeah, so I've got it in everywhere. Don't blame me if your one gets stolen now because Villiers told everyone about it. But
no, but I think what's important there is the last thing you want is for your luggage to not reach your safari destination because of something you've put inside. And I say this because it's happened to me where I put one of these rechargeable lights in my bag, and for 10 days in Malawi, I didn't have toiletries or clothes with me. So what I recommend you do is when you check in, if you do want to take your multi-tool, your Leatherman with you, you have to ask them whether it's okay or not. Because if you're in a country where they're not going to put your suitcase on, you're going to go without your bag. It's interesting that you've been able to do that, but I've wanted to take mine with, and I've never done so because I've been too scared for them to take it with.
Two things, though. You put your flashlight in the wrong bag, which is why you didn't get your bag. So I always have a flashlight, just because walking back to your room at night, you don't want to stand on a snake more than anything else. So a flashlight is always good. You cannot have rechargeable lithium-ion batteries in your checked luggage. So Villiers' torch was in his checked luggage, so his checked luggage didn't arrive. So if you have a torch, it has to be in your carry-on luggage. If you don't want to risk a Leatherman, you can get these really cool... I don't have one because I have a Leatherman, but you can get a really cool photography multi-tool, which basically has the screwdriver, it has the Allen key, it has the other screwdriver. It has everything you need, but it doesn't have the knife, because this is the part that
I
is
think,
a problem.
I think that's a good idea. That might be the safer way to do it.
So a cool multi-tool. So on the side of that, I also have these... which I'm surprised these don't get taken off me, to be fair, because these are often in my...
They take the Allen key, but they leave you with a little pokey one.
Yeah. So it's a tiny little screwdriver, which I think I got this out of something similar to a fortune cookie 20 years ago. But they're tiny. So they're actually perfect for photography screws because every other screwdriver is too big. So I've got a bunch of these floating around, and they're very handy. So... back to your question on our braces and things and beanbags and support. I shoot a lot of flash. So I have extra gear, again, that you don't have. I have a Canon flash, but I like this Godox 8200 Pro flash as well. It's a 200 watt second light, so it's quite powerful. We don't use it on full power because we don't want to damage the animal's eyes and all that, but it has great reach. But because I have a flash, I now need a flash system. So it couples with this giant magnifying glass, right? Which then you can aim and focus the light. So if it's not quite making it there, you can get it there. That fits nice and snug in my bag. But now you need something to put the light on. So that contraption you saw on my 400mm, this blue one, this is actually a flash bracket. So on top of this piece here, your little tripod head will sit with the flash here. so that your flash is not on your camera. And I can also move this to the side. So by moving it to the side, I don't get animal eye shine, which is great because nobody wants green eyes, or nobody wants to have to fix green eyes every time. But if it's a static subject, a leopard in a tree at sunset or whatever, that's really pretty. I also travel with this thing, which weighs about 4 kilos. So this probably weighs a couple of 100 grams. Yeah, Manfrotto Super Clamp, you can get other brands. They're exactly the same. So this can screw straight onto a vehicle bar, vertical or horizontal. And then on the top here, I can put a little tripod head. So that little tripod head will connect to there. And then I will aim that at the animal. Then it's very far off camera, so I'm not getting eye shine and stuff like that. That system does not work as soon as the animal starts moving. And then I need this thing. So this thing is secondary versus this would be my go-to. But then again, like I say, if the animal's moving, then this goes out the window and then I have to use...
You know what your setup reminds me of, Lance? You know those guys that move house with a tiny truck or bucky, and they have the bed, the chairs, the kitchen sink, and everything on the back, and the rear end just scrapes the ground.
Yeah.
that's what your setup reminds me of.
So again, I don't always take all of this stuff. So if I'm going to a place where I'm not likely to use a flash, I won't take any flash equipment because it's just weight. And all of my flash equipment is very heavy. So one other thing that I've always got in my bag, always, with 3 things, is a pair of, so this is where I keep my little microfiber cloths and my sunglass cleaning liquid, which actually works nicely on lenses as well, but please don't use any on lenses if you don't know it'll work, because you didn't hear it from me. And then I have these yellow glasses. These are cheap. They're dirt cheap. I think they were 400 Rand. It's like $15-16 or whatever. And I wear these at night to stop the bugs going in my eyes. It's not to give me x-ray vision. It's not to make me see better at night. It's literally just to stop the bugs flying in your eyes, because once you've had that once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, it's enough. So I always have that with me. This is a huge case. I recommend getting a smaller one, but I have other stuff that floats in there as well. And then because I want to be like the safari expert and make these amazing videos, I typically have a 360 camera with me shoved in my bag as well, and I always forget to use this. So the other nice use of the super clamp is if I remember my 360 camera, obviously I can mount this to the vehicle and I can mount this 360 camera to the vehicle as well. So it's always filming, it's filming the sighting, it's filming us, it's filming the guests. It can be quite cool. Otherwise, at the bottom of my 360 camera, I have this tiny little ball head, and this actually sits in the hot shoe of my camera. So I've had sightings, if we're, especially in a place where we're walking, mana pools, stuff like that, where we're walking into animals. I will then have this sitting on top of my camera. We walk into a sighting, I can take pictures. It's recording still. It's recording video as well, which is nice. And then if I needed both, I will hopefully have both. Depending on the trip as well. If we tend to be on a walking safari, or the last safari we did was a helicopter safari, I have my harness. So a harness is very cool. So you're throwing it around your shoulders and then you're clipping your cameras to it. So the last safari, we were in a helicopter. I didn't want to drop my camera out of the helicopter, so I had them strapped to my body. Very cool on a walking safari as well, to have all that weight out of your arms and onto your shoulders. Very handy. And then I always have a bunch of small stuff that we actually have forgotten to even mention so far. So sensor cleaning kit. I've always got a couple of small sensor swabs with me and some fluid, just in case I do something stupid, take a lens off, get a big snotty bit of dirt in there and ruin the rest of my shots. I've got a way of cleaning that out. I always have a couple of these SanDisk Extreme Pro hard drives for backing everything up, because I tend to take now more photos than my computer can hold at once. Camera, obviously to get your photos off your cameras, I have card readers. So there's always Lincoln card readers all over the place. And then another thing that we've forgotten is chargers. chargers are the bane of my life because this thing here charges my one flash battery, and look at the size of it, right? So if I want to charge my flash alone, I have to take this thing. I found a cool system of getting around the actual cameras. So this is one of my camera chargers, and then the other one is about the same size as the other flash one. But instead of charging my cameras that way now, what I travel with is one of these U-green chargers. So this unit is quite large, but it has 4 USB-C ports that come out, 2 USB-As. It comes with these nice cables, and then these plugs here, so the USB-C cables, I can plug directly into my cameras and charge the batteries that way. So if I'm really struggling for weight allowance and size because I've packed all this other nonsense and I need to cut down on some stuff, I will actually leave the chargers behind and take the one charger. And then just to finish it off, there's something I always have, or a few things that I always have. Always have a hat. So you always need a hat on safari because you are in the blazing hot sun. They're not very cool, but I also have a big floppy hat because I actually want my ears when I'm like 40, just saying. One of the biggest things that gets guides is the sun and your ears. In the winter, we've got these really cool Ellie and May beanies, which we've co-branded with them. So in the winter, we'll have a nice beanie on because safaris, believe it or not, can get cold. Most people think Africa is only hot, but we get freezing cold here. I always have a little lip chapsticky thing. I know you've always got eye drops. And then one of a photographer's best friends, and sadly we would have both had a moment where we need to use these guys. And it's, I don't even know what they're called. Basically, it's a pill cork. Because you don't want to...
if you have diarrhea trouble.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's pretty much everything in my system. I've normally got a little first aid kit, which is like headache tablets, rehydrates, a couple of sticking plasters because there's a lot of thorny bushes and stuff like that in Africa. So I've always got way too much stuff, which we have just discovered.
Guys, as you can see, there are endless and endless pieces of photographic equipment that you can use for wildlife photography. And what I suggest, if you have any questions about anything specific, drop it in the comments down below and Lance and I will try and answer you there. We were going to chat a little bit about camera trapping as well, but I think we're running a little bit out of time, and that could probably be a whole episode on its own to talk about
It's
what
a whole
an actual
different
camera
bundling,
trap
yeah.
setup looks like. So I also just want to use this opportunity to thank all our patrons. These are the people that support the Safari Expert YouTube channel specifically, and also the Panthera Photo Safaris Conservation Fund, by making a monthly donation. If you guys want to get involved, go and check out the links that we've added at the top of the video description. Lance, thank you so much for showing all of us what's in your multiple camera bags. I think you should hit the gym if you want to be able to move around for the next year or so. But I really hope that the viewers enjoyed actually just seeing a little bit what us as pros use, and also realizing that equipment can look very different, brands can differ. The most important thing is knowing what you want your photograph to look like and what you need to get those results.
Absolutely, yeah.
We will see you guys very soon in episode 9, which will be the second last one in this season. If you haven't checked out our Timbavati Kings Camp vlog, where Lance actually shows us his bungee cord in use in the field, go and check that out right now.